Hi there, and welcome to the first part in a short video series on how we use SolidWorks to build suspension frames at Noble bikes. Up on the screen here I've got the Noble F4, and this is the model that we're going to use to show you how we built this. And as you look at this may look like a fairly simple assembly with not too much going on. It actually gets out of control relatively quickly, and you got to be aware of that. For example, if I bring up the assembly expert window, you'll see that the total number of components in this model is 92. That's a fair amount of components to keep track of, and you really want to make sure that you keep all this stuff organized, otherwise your model can be really cumbersome to work with. And you organize it on the left side here in what's called the model tree. The way we organize it, we've got some top-level components that form the actual functioning frame. For example, we got the front triangle highlighted in green, the swing arm, the seat stay, shock mount, and suspension link. These top-level components actually form the functioning suspension frame, and we can work with that and extrapolate data from that. It does not include any of the hardware. The hardware is organized in its own little features. Like here we have these folders that have all the hardware in it, and we organize it in such a way that it points to a particular area of the frame. So for example, if I open up the link hardware folder, here you can see that we've got pivot axle screws, pivot spacers, and at the bottom here we've got some modified toolbox components. By organizing stuff like this in folders, it becomes very easy to locate parts as you work with your model, because like I showed earlier, we got to keep track of 92 components, and that can get confusing very quickly. Another thing to note is that this is a functioning 3D model. It actually works. But there's a little quirk here that maybe not everybody is familiar with. For example, if you look at the shock here, the shock is its own little assembly, and by default SolidWorks will want to bring that in as a rigid subassembly. If that's the case, the shock actually is compressible as its own little assembly, but if you bring it in rigid, the suspension won't move anymore. So you actually have to come in the component properties window, change rigid to flexible to make sure that this thing will actually work as an assembly. Those are just some small things that are really important to know, because otherwise you end up with a model that is actually not functional. So at the top level here we have a couple top level components, and then all the hardware located in folders here. And then what we'll do in video number 2 is actually go into a little more detail on how we built some of these parts in more detail. For example, the next series will be the front triangle, and we'll show you how we set that up and how we actually built that model, and we'll go from there. All right, hope you enjoyed it, and see you back soon.